anything.
Yes. I can ask you anything?
You can ask me anything.
What should I ask? Well, let me ask you about this book you're reading, because you sent me a quote this morning.
I did.
Seems like it's something that's pretty interesting to you.
It is.
I'd love to hear more about this.
Well, it's been a interesting couple weeks. It's just funny how in the process of life, I think there's themes that come up. You know, as I'm working with clients or, you know, families or...
Is your theme this week very itch related or...
No, it is not itch related, although I do experience a tremendous amount of itching, but not as much as before.
This is why we have a podcast, not a video.
That's right.
Because you would feel very bad for Mark with his case of poison, whatever he's got on him.
Exactly.
Poison sumac, is that?
Poison sumac, yes. I realized I have a face for radio.
Well, thankfully, I think your beard protected your face.
It did.
So,
It did.
It's just the rest of you.
Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations. So probably your recommendation for others is maybe don't use a chainsaw and poison sumac?
Yeah, okay. I would definitely recommend identifying if you're cutting down a dead tree and there's like vines, there's life growing up it, you might want to identify what that vine is before you just kind of have at it, you know, hacking away and sawing and, you know, and bushwhacking through, you know, poison sumac, because you will pay a price. There is no doubt, and it will be very beneficial to, you know, have good health people in your life that can get you on a, you know, a steroid rather quickly. Yes. And so, yes, I am very thankful. I'm very thankful too that it just is on my skin. It could have been could have been a internal thing. And
because I've heard stories of people burning poison ivy or whatever. And oh man, I can't even imagine.
Yes. So, like I say, I count myself very fortunate that I was cutting it up and, you know, making it into, you know, fine little pieces, and I didn't inhale enough of that to cause an issue. But it was funny, even just where the hole in my pant leg was, you know, that part of my knee is just red and
those fine little pieces stuck right to your skin.
They did. But but I am feeling much better.
Yeah.
Than I was over the weekend.
Phew.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm sorry I interrupted the themes in your life.
But... It's okay. It's because the reality of it is, even that had me thinking on the theme of conflict. Because I think we all view conflict differently. Mm-hmm. You follow me? And it was interesting because as I was reading, I had this devotional of Tozer. A.W. Tozer for Christian leaders, and it was talking about some misguided Christian leaders feel that they must preserve harmony at any cost, so they do everything possible to reduce friction. They should remember that there is no friction in a machine that has been shut down for the night. Turn off the power, and you will have no problem with moving parts. Also remember that there is a human society where there are no problems, the cemetery. The dead have no differences of opinion. They generate no heat because they have no energy and no motion. But their penalty is sterility and complete lack of achievement. And it was eye-opening for me when I thought about how much of our lives really is a matter of conflict, or can have conflict, just because there's motion involved. Like the machine. It's like, I think our lives are very motion oriented, like a machine. And I think if we think that we can operate or move in some ways without facing resistance or conflict, I think that's naive. And, you know, and I think some cases, and here again, it comes back to what my viewpoint of conflict is. You know, is it quote unquote, air quotes type thing, is conflict good or is conflict bad? because if I tend to view conflict as something that's bad, I may try to avoid it. But I think in some cases, what I end up doing is just pulling energy away from another system if I'm trying to avoid conflict. So that relationship will tend to diminish as I try to avoid conflict.
Yeah.
Does that make sense in a systems?
Sense. Yeah.
Because and I think so often,
yet they can go the other way, right?
Oh yes.
Where
yes,
the conflict is so heated that the machine burns up, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
I'm just acknowledging the fact that, like you said, we all see conflict differently, and also conflict comes in all shapes and sizes. And I think what Tozer's referring to is important and needed, conflict.
Yes.
And of course, there's a line where conflict becomes war and becomes, or whatever.
Yes.
And I don't know. And then how we see conflict, you said we all see it differently. It reminds me of when you talked about attachment styles, right? Like, depending on how we were raised, conflict might represent, the
very
parent
so.
who I needed to keep calm, or what, remember when we
do.
Yeah.
Because, and that becomes in therapy, especially marital therapy, one of my key questions will be, well, how did your family handle conflict? How was conflict resolved? And typically it's that second part, that people really kind of stumble with. Well, it wasn't necessarily resolved, and therefore, we're not able to resolve it today, and to actually find resolution. And I think that's the part where recognizing that conflict is a part of relationship. And, conflict in that maybe that middle ground between pulling back or just burning up, is this ability to get to know one another and understand each other's differences in a way that builds intimacy, through conflict. And I think it's part of what we desire through how I see it is to be able to recognize, we are different, but yet we can have these conversations that reveal differences, and we don't have to allow them to divide us, but they can actually be a unifying force in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting how sometimes someone's difference can represent basically an inability to accept that person, right?
Yes.
Like, and that's a big thing about how we see it is saying, no, maybe we can accept others even when they're different, right?
Exactly.
And recognizing that those differences can bring value to my life. To hear those differences, understand those differences, to know a real person who disagrees with me, and yet, I can accept them. Like, it's such a valuable thing. And I just think about even in my own marriage, like learning how to do conflict over 18 years of marriage. We've been learning, right?
Yeah.
We're still not perfect at it. I don't know that you ever get to a point where you've perfected conflict, maybe.
Sure.
But one of the things I've had to learn is that acceptance. Like, okay, that's how she thinks. Well, that's okay. I don't like it. I don't want that. I would rather her think like me.
Yeah.
But it's okay.
Yes.
And I think that's maybe what you're getting at in terms of, that's not always the resolution of conflict is compromise and or acceptance. Sometimes you come to one side or another, but that I think that's a completely acceptable part of conflict is coming to a place of going, okay, now I see it, and that's good enough. What do you think?
And I think part of the reasons that we try to avoid conflict at times has to do with the hurt that we may have experienced within a relationship.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily want to have to revisit that.
Yeah.
You follow me? But as long as I'm, in some ways, if I'm just ignoring it, it becomes the elephant in the room type thing. And we're, not able to address it in such a way that says, okay, this is how I'm seeing it. And I think, part of that difference, part of our, experience growing up, has so much to do with how we remember things. You follow me? I think in our day and age, we tend to think that in our brain is a video recording. You follow me? So when I see an incident and you see an incident, you saw it exactly the same way as I think I'm seeing it based on a video recording. Mm-hmm. But our brains don't work that way. Mm-hmm. Our brains, store, segments. They bunch and they group, and and that becomes kind of the way our memories are stored, with these little sound, these bytes, if you will. And I think to think that you see the same thing the same exact way I do is part of the mistake we make. Because after all, you should know exactly how you hurt me. Because if you saw it the same way I did, which I'm thinking you did based on the video recording of in my head, of course you know how you hurt me. Mm-hmm. So you should know you need to apologize for that. And at the same time, you never even saw the hurt.
Right.
You never even saw how what was said or wasn't said was hurtful where I was concerned, based on my viewpoint. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like the memories that are stored, I love that thought, the segments or whatever, but they're also the peaks and valleys of that memory, kind of the architecture of that memory is defined by who you are. So if you think about it, like someone who's colorblind, right? If you were to ask them to paint the picture, well, it would sound different. Like, no doubt. Hey, remember that day when we both went to the lake and there were sailboats or whatever? Can you describe what you saw there?
Yeah.
What they describe is going to sound different than what I just saw because of a color blindness, right? And
exactly.
So, certain things would probably be diminished in their view. Maybe they didn't notice the buoy, right? Because it's red.
Sure.
But they noticed, I don't know, let's say the lighthouse, right?
Yeah.
Where my thoughts, or, my mind was transfixed on this buoy. It's bright red right in the middle.
Sure.
So, that stood out to me. Now, of course, we're talking about colors, but take that and apply it to emotions, which we've talked about before, being like colors, right? This idea that maybe in that situation I saw disrespect and you saw lack of love. I think that's a common marriage thing, right? Like I wanted to feel love there and I wanted to feel respect or whatever, and so we paint these pictures, and mine has a bright red buoy and yours has a black and white lighthouse, and neither of us see the other thing because we are so transfixed.
Yes.
Does that make sense? So then our memory is created that way and stored that way.
Yeah.
And like you said, we're like, well, let me pull up the recording.
Exactly.
See? Look, red buoy. And they're like, that's not what I saw.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's crazy.
It is. And it comes back to that perceptual difference at times. And I like to say, I'm not minimizing everything to perception. But I also have to realize that is a part of the dynamic that's involved in that conflict of how I see it. Mm-hmm. This is what I saw. Mm-hmm. This is what I heard. And I think when we get to that point of being able, when we get so transfixed on what I saw versus what you saw, I think that's where the difficulty resolving conflict comes from.
When we're trying to prove our case kind of thing. Yeah.
Because ultimately I have to be right and possibly you have to be wrong to agree with my rightness. Where in reality, if we can take it to the point of saying, okay, that's how you saw it. And I respect the fact that the lighthouse was more important to you in that moment. Because I do think in some cases, we can have this even as husband and wife.
Yeah.
Our priorities are different. Mm-hmm. Sometimes work may overcome, the male priority, or, family may overcome, and I think those dynamics, neither one wrong.
Right.
And neither one wrong. You said right. No, I'm just joking with you. But the ability. Yeah. We're going to have a conflict here. But at the same time, the ability to recognize, okay, this is how I see it and this is how you saw it. And how can we bring those together in such a way that said, okay, this is where the problem lies. Mm-hmm. Because I was focused there and you were focused there. And what I heard was that I'm not important to you. And I felt alone. And how can we both be in that moment? And yet I just come away feeling hurt. And you come away feeling, that was a great day.
Right.
Wonderful memory, being able to see the sailboats and the lighthouse. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And the buoy too.
Right.
So I think that's where, and from my perspective, I think, conflict can be something we avoid, but I like the way he used the analogy of heat, mm-hmm. Friction and heat, because I think there is something to be said for the benefits of friction as well. Mm-hmm. When we think about it in terms of fire and, and the things that warm us mm-hmm. also elicit friction to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Movement, life.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it just kind of became for me a viewpoint mm-hmm. over the past couple weeks, is to be able to recognize, okay, yes, like patterns and cycles, if we can recognize we have these patterns and cycles in our lives, it kind of takes away that personal element where you did this to me. Mm-hmm. Whereas I can see it as part of an interaction, then it minimizes the personal dynamic and it becomes less reactive. So when I can see conflict in the same way, I recognize it as a source of friction or heat that is just part of movement in life, mm-hmm. then it's okay. It can normalize it to an extent where there's nothing wrong with you or wrong with me, the fact that we have a conflict between us.
So based on that analogy of the machine, the heat is, you think about a motor, heat is not a helpful byproduct, except in the winter. I think it funnels to your heat system. Is that correct?
Sure. I mean, yeah, however you want to define it.
Heat. I'm just thinking of a car motor. But in a typical, just out driving, there's so many systems in place to minimize heat and friction and to address it.
Sure.
I think in his analogy, the key thing is that it is a byproduct of a healthy functioning environment, machine, or whatever. So if you don't have that, then you don't have the health.
Yes.
I think his argument wasn't necessarily that it's a good thing, although I think there are good things. I'm not saying that's not true, but I do think the most important takeaway is that if you don't have conflict, you don't have relationship.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
Or at least not closeness.
Yes.
Because that is a byproduct of a good, functioning, healthy relationship, is that those differences come to the surface and bump up against each other.
Yes.
And you should desire a relationship that's close enough that happens, not that you desire conflict.
Right. Not conflict for the sake of conflict.
Right, but conflict as proof of a living, viable, well-oiled machine. Well-oiled being...
Yeah.
we movement. Deal with conflict.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
That's the oil. That's the differences are bumping up against each other. And, let's pour some oil on this and let's talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Versus, let's light a match and let's do this again. Go 12 rounds, right?
Yes.
Just made me think about that analogy with the motor. I think that's such a good... Yeah, when that motor's running, that's when so much good stuff's going to happen, right?
Exactly.
But it will have that byproduct of heat and friction.
No doubt. And I think there's a part of healthy relationship as well that isn't necessarily focused on the friction, but healthy maintenance in such a way that says, okay, yes, this is a part of our lives, but it's not the only part of our lives. And we have these other systems in place, where we can, bring refreshment in, the oil, if you will. That helps us say, okay, yeah, we enjoy our time together, even though we experience conflict at times as a result of getting to know one another. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the part of it, and it another dynamic I think that I kind of equated with this in the process was there's a principle Henry Cloud mentioned. It actually came from a client too, that he talks about, hard, easy, or easy, hard. And I think, the basis of that principle is, we can, if we start with the easy things or try to focus on all the easy things, typically it gets harder as we go, and yet if we start with the hard things, which I think sometimes between individuals can be addressing conflict, it gets easier as we go because the difficult dynamics are addressed at the very beginning. Who I am, who you are, those differences. And then I think we can find an easiness that goes with that. And I think, that's a principle that we can, in business or, in other areas. And it just happened to kind of coincide with what I'm experiencing, with just life in general. How, I think our tendency, is to kind of want to do the easy stuff first. And granted, there's something to the snowball effect,
right?
That says that. But if I'm just focusing on the little things and ignoring the bigger things, I think that we can do that in relationship as well.
You're cruising for a bruising.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Because, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking the analogy, low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
That's kind of the snowball thing. Like, there is some value to that as long as the bigger thing is in view in terms of, in your line of sight of things that you're going to accomplish, right? Like, we are going... In other words, the avoidance thing is the problem here.
Exactly.
But I like... Because you think about dating, right? When you go on your first date, you're like, all right, let's figure out the thing we can have conflict first. And then we'll do the easy things. It's sip a milkshake together, right? Like,
right.
First, let's start with what's your view on, whatever, disciplining children or whatever. I don't know, whatever that polarizing thing might be, right?
Yeah.
We don't do that because, of course, that's not.
Yeah.
But one could argue that in the course of a dating relationship, you should start to do those hard things. So that, at some point you go, okay, this probably isn't the right partner for me, right?
Yeah.
So you do have to hit those things, and if you don't, you might end up in a relationship where easy and then hard, right? Easy things first, and then the hard things come after marriage. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
Analogy, but
and I think when we view our lives, whether it's work or whether it's relationship or business, I think it's important to recognize that hard things have to be done. And I think the more that we do hard things at times, it's recognizable that there would be more conflict involved because there is more friction created by moving bigger things, and so for me that just kind of tied together in a way. Even as we're thinking about, the property and where we want to go and what we want to do, it's at times, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, especially more so for Chris. Cause it's like, she's just trying to plant a garden some days, and here the insects come or here the rains come, and there's this conflict, or this resistance, if you will. And it's like, it ends up wiping out the tomato plants, And it's like, that's frustrating. And yet at the same time, it's like, okay, that's part of a learning. And then, so what do we need to do differently? And, and it's not, and unfortunately for her, it's not so much a matter of giving up. It's that process of being able to say, okay, this is how we need to do it differently. And some of that may be, some things have to be put off till we're actually out to the property full time, where we can actually maintain things along the way versus expecting them to grow by themselves without our protection or without our maintenance to a degree. Because I think, I think it's biblical, that that we're living in a world that will resist our growth. That we're living in an environment that is counter to what we desire to do at times. Take heart. I have overcome. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome. And I think we have that ability to overcome. And I see conflict as part of that overcoming that we can do, especially within family systems.
Yeah. I mean, family systems are no different than a garden, right? Like we need maintenance. We need
no different. Maybe a little different, but yes, very many similarities.
There's a good metaphor there, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But we talked about this in the planning things episode.
Yes.
Is just this idea that there's so many metaphors in growing things because just like your garden, your relationships need tending. They need gardening. They need the weeds pulled. They need shade from some of the sun sometimes. They need watering at key point. It's like, if you want a good, healthy garden, well, it requires attention and effort. And that's no different than the good relationships in your life. But I think in a garden, obviously there can be frustration to where the effort I put in didn't yield what I expected it to.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And there can be that tendency, like you said, to say, maybe gardening's not for me.
Yeah.
Because I did the X, Y, and Z, and I still end up with no tomatoes.
Yes.
So maybe tomatoes aren't for me. Maybe I need to try squash, right? Whatever.
Or we take that in a family system and say, this relationship isn't for me.
Yeah, that's what I was...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
I was hinting at that one.
Okay.
No.
But if you wanted to continue with the squash, if you wanted to continue with the squash, that's okay.
The point is squash being a new relationship, right? Like, let's try this one. I was like, well, sometimes it just requires sticking it out and learning the patterns, learning the systems, and obviously in a dating relationship, that's the time to go, do I like squash or do I like tomatoes?
Yeah.
Whatever. But there's something to be said about, let me learn how to grow these tomatoes. Okay, so you can't do this. You do have to do this. This is a non-negotiable, right?
Right.
Or, maybe this year I got lucky, and it's because I didn't realize how much rain mattered. And it just rained a lot, and I just thought I had a green thumb, and you know what I mean?
I do.
And that could be like your honeymoon phase the first year. It's like, it's just magical, everything's great, and then it turns out she doesn't like how I do dishes, or I don't make the bed right, or whatever it is, and the next year there's a few more bugs, a little less rain, and it requires effort, it requires learning, it requires modifying,
Yeah. And I like the analogy of the difference, because I think when we ignore the preferences, I guess I'll call it, of certain plants, some needing full sun, some needing shade, some needing, if we just choose to ignore that difference, and that the difference that you need in your environment for a healthy growth and what I need, it's like, okay, I think that can be an aspect where we come together and we share the sun at times, but at the same time we can have our individual differences where, okay, I need a little time away, and this is my shade, and you can stay in the sun if you want to. But I know myself well enough. If I just stay in the sun all the time, if you're full sun and I'm partial shade, it's like, I enjoy the sun, but I also need shade too.
But it will kill me.
Yes. Whereas if you're just in the shade all the time and you're full sun, you're not going to thrive there. And I think, you will, and if I may borrow the analogy, you're going to fall into that depression, if you will. If you just try to live in all shade, when you're designed for full sun, that's gonna harm you in some way. You're gonna experience a result of that, and I think to ignore those dynamics is naive.
Yes, it's interesting in both those sides, right? Full sun or prefers partial shade. The result is the same: shriveling.
Yes.
Death,
lack of growth,
falling back, lack of growth. It's the results look the same, but often they can come from different reasons. And so so that's one thing. Obviously, I'm sure we both learned in our marriages, right? Is if we
are learning one or the other.
Yes, because always, right? Is if we're always full sun, well, one of us is going to be very happy and growing, but there's a chance the other one is starting to shrivel or whatever, and so there's that balance that we have recognized. And I think that's one thing I've had to learn is like, no, this is not just a cute difference. This is a life and death situation. Not to be melodramatic, but it's like that my partner needs certain things that I don't need, or needs a different amount, right?
Sure.
And so for her, more introverted, needing that alone time, she needs that as much as I need my hangout time, right?
Sure.
Like, and we both need those things to be healthy, growing, whatever. And there'll be times where we shrivel a little bit because we're not getting enough. But the point is, it is a need. It's not just a cute difference between us. And it's like, oh, you can get over your introverted self and just learn how to be social, or vice versa. Like, you can get over your need for, I should be enough for you, right? Or whatever. No, they're both needs. Important needs, just like the sun. And I think...
and I will say, you know, as we talk about the similarities between family systems and plant life, I will say that I think, you know, as we experience marriage or, you know, relationship over time, I think, you know, we can change or learn the value of more sun or more shade. You know, because I think about our relationship early on, I was probably more of the full sun, you know, and as I've, you know, gotten to know Chris and through our marriage, I would say she was more partial shade. And I think we've kind of come, you know, more towards the middle. I don't have to be the sun. I don't have to be in the sun all the time. I don't have to be around people. I don't have to be extroverted all the time. And I've learned to value, you know, that partial shade of pulling back and saying, okay, yeah, this is just our time, or this is just my time. And Chris, coming from where she's better able to understand that need, you know, because that doesn't, when I am up to capacity with my extroversion, it's okay to come back and step back and say, okay, I just need time away. And I think as I've gotten to know Chris, we've kind of brought that together. She can definitely be as extroverted. It's not that she, you know, desires it all the time though.
Yeah.
And I think now we're at a point where we've come to appreciate who we both are, and I'm not as full sun or extroverted as I was. And she's probably more extroverted. Not that she was ever introverted, I'd say, you know, completely, but on a continuum, if you will, you know, to where we've both kind of moved a little more towards the center, and it's easier for us to find agreement with what we want to do or how we want to spend our time.
Symbiosis.
Yeah.
That idea of being able to live together in harmony, but not in a way that is compromising, but is complementary. You know?
Yes.
Yeah, because I was thinking about even plants that have preference towards full sun. If you gave them what they want, that can kill them sometimes too, right? Like, because I think there's a balance needed in all of creation, right? And so if there's only sun and never night, or never water, never shade, never whatever, well, they're going to die no matter what their preference is, right? Like, they might really like the sun and they'll shoot up, but their roots are shallow and they fall over and they die, right?
Yeah.
I think about, we grew some sunflowers last year.
Yeah.
And man, they shot up and they looked like picture perfect, you know, outside our window.
Yeah.
Our window's probably, I don't know, 8-10 feet up above the ground, and it was like eye to eye with us, you know.
Wow.
And the first little storm came along, a little bit of wind, and they just all kind of, you know, and so we tried tying up or whatever, but it kind of makes me think of that, like, they got what they wanted. They got that sun, but they probably could have had a few shady days to learn how to grow some roots, you know what I mean? And I think that's true for us as well. Like, I think what I need is all this social engagement, but really it's trying to fulfill a certain need that I truly have, you know, that isn't necessarily best served by that resource. That's part of what can feed that need, but it shouldn't be everything. And I've talked about this concept of approval addiction, or some people call it people pleasing. And it's like, you get your jollies from pleasing people, from seeing a pleasing face on someone in front of you that you're trying to appease or please or whatever, or approval. You're like, I made that person proud of me. And it fulfills a certain need that you have, but often that fulfillment is an unhealthy way that creates a need for more of that.
Sure.
Which, again, is unhealthy, but it'd be better if I learned those things through a different process and my roots were growing, right?
Sure. And I think what you're describing is part of that conflict that we can face if we're just trying to appease all of the people. In that extroversion, we're going from one relationship to another relationship to another relationship, because the minute we can't please that other person, that's too much conflict for me to deal with.
Yeah.
And so I move on. And I think that's part of the ability of being able to pull back, is to be able to say, no, it's not about knowing everyone. Maybe it's knowing 10 people well, and therefore, and for some people, it may be, they would prefer 3 to 5 close, intimate friends, where other people might want, 20, 30 more friends, because then that way they can move. And I'm not saying either one's wrong, right, yeah. But if we're just focusing on more friends, we're missing out on part of the ability to build healthy relationship. And I think there is something to be said for, the ability to focus on building friendships from a, intimacy standpoint. I really know who you are and you know who I am. Therefore, we're able to be authentic with one another. And I think, even as couples, when we're able to recognize the conflicts we have and address them as such, even to be able to address past hurts, not in a way that brings up the past, but in a way that says, you know what, when we went down that road, when we drove by that place, I remember when we had that conflict there. And I was reminded of that today. And, and that allows that opportunity for that individual to share a part of who they are in that intimacy, that they were reminded of that moment, not in a way that's saying that's your fault, but in a way that says, oh, wow, thanks for sharing that. I didn't think about it that way, but I appreciate you being willing to let me know that was a thought that crossed your mind. And is there something I can do to help? Do we need to find an alternate route some days? Or, is that specific to this time of year? Or, when those certain, because I think, I think there's a lot to be said for that, because, our body never forgets. It's a book, it's a popular, but I think there's a lot to that, in those processes of hurt or conflict, when it comes back to that, oh, I'm not going there again, because that hurt too much. And I think, when we hold life like that, we tend to pull back from relationship, and we miss out on that ability to have that reciprocation that says, oh, wow, I didn't know that I hurt you that way. Or, even to the point of being able to say, yeah, I did know I hurt you that way. And then that relationship may need to change. Because if I'm hanging around people who deliberately desire to hurt me, okay, then maybe that's not a healthy relationship.
Right. Yeah.
But yet, if I'm willing to recognize this is how I hurt, and we understand healthy relationship in a way that says, oh, wow, okay, thanks for sharing. Didn't know I did it. Or, yeah, I can remember saying that, but that's not what I meant. And, just trying to walk that through in such a way that takes ownership or responsibility. And I think another example, if I may, it creates healthy boundaries. If I know where I start and where you stop, then we can both take responsibility for our own, what's in your area to take responsibility for, what's in your yard. You follow me? Because sometimes what's in your yard might overgrow into mine. You follow me? But that doesn't necessarily, the fact that I've allowed that to overgrow into my yard without addressing it with you, that can become, your issue can become my issue.
Yeah.
But if I'm willing to say, okay, Justin, that big weeping willow, you got some branches. I'm tired of cleaning up all the leaves from that tree. You need to trim my side. Because that's overgrowing. And I think that's healthy relationship. because it's your problems aren't my problems and my problems aren't your problems, because otherwise we're enmeshed.
Yeah.
But when we have a healthy boundary, I know what I own, what I have control, air quotes, over, but ultimately what I'm responsible for.
Yep. Yeah, because in that analogy, I'm responsible for my resentment of that tree and those leaves in my yard.
Yes.
Like, that's on me. I can't blame the other person for my resentment.
Yes.
But it is their tree, and I can say that is your tree, you need to trim it. And that's how I deal with my side, which is the resentment, is the frustration, is the desire for vengeance. I'm going to grow my own tree.
Yes. Versus just saying, hey,
yeah,
be addressing it in a form of healthy conflict, even before it grows to resentment.
Yeah.
You know, not that resentment isn't a reality. Don't get me wrong.
That, you know, the struggle with me is I don't often know it's a conflict until I feel the resentment. So,
okay.
So that might be a system that's broken in my brain, but I tend to overlook a thing and an issue until it's starting development resentment, and then it becomes difficult to resolve because it's resentful. But we can break down my issues as a different point. But I'd love to.
But that's interesting. Yeah. That's a great analogy. You know, as far as how people handle conflict differently. Because I think there is something to be said for, when I start to think it, it's like, wow, that tree is starting to get a little over the line. And that might be a time to be able to say, hey, have you noticed? Because this is what I'm noticing. You follow me? Versus, well, I don't want to deal with that today. And, today becomes 2 years. And then suddenly I spend more of my time and I'm losing my grass. And I'm raking up your leaves. And at that point, it's like, I'm ready to cut your tree down. I'll just come across the yard, and do that. And I think that's a good analogy for what resentment can be. Yeah. Is that saying, taking what is yours.
And also, you're making that tree grow like that on purpose. I know what you're doing.
Yes. You did that on purpose.
Right.
You planted that tree just to kill my grass.
Right.
And you're trying to give me something to do.
Yeah.
As if I don't have enough to do already. And that's what we can experience sometimes in relationship. And
so there's two perspectives I'd love to get your thoughts on. Okay, so
I did say you could ask me anything, didn't I?
You did say that. I recall hearing that. From your perspective, so two polar opposites is I'm someone who avoids conflict. I am what we call codependent, right, in the relationship, where I do my best to cover up for your mistakes and compensate for them, but I'm still being hurt by them over and over and over. That's point A. How do you encourage that person to embrace conflict in a way that's healthy and pushes the relationship forward? So that's A. Yep. B is I'm the other person. I have no problem with conflict. I do conflict every day. I'm great at conflict, right? And not realizing I'm actually bowling over everyone around me, and I don't know how to do conflict correctly, because what I think is good, proper way to do conflict is just shoving everything out of my way. Does that make sense? And I'll tell anyone what I think anytime, and I have no problem with that, and not recognizing that every relationship is either gone because they got pushed out, or they're the codependents around you who are propping you up, and it's not a healthy relationship, but you feel perfectly healthy because your tree's growing nice and strong. You know what I mean? At the expense, right? Yeah. So I'd love to hear, because I know you've had these conversations in counseling with the marital counseling, whatever, where you've had to connect. You could speak to each of those versions to say, here's what you need to do, or how you see it, right? Yeah. Like, how do you see it, Mark? How do you encourage A and B?
There's two things. There's a bunch of things coming to my mind.
I bet. I see the wheel. Let's start a new episode right here.
I like the aspect of truth and mercy. Okay. And Jimmy Evans talks about this. He's a guy I know. Listen to Marriage Today, Marriage
on the Rocks.
He's Marriage on the Rocks guy. Yeah. Truth. Let's see. Truth is a cheerleader without a team. All rah rah rah. No. Mercy is a cheerleader without a team, and truth is operation without anesthesia. You follow me? Mm-hmm. To the point we can be so truthful. You did this, you did that, you did that. That's how I see it. But yet, that may be the truth that I have, but that doesn't extend mercy to you. You follow me? That you didn't intend some of the things that happened. You follow me? Mm-hmm. And I think part of that, when we go back to the initial analogy of the codependent, is the ability to recognize what is true. Okay, am I just choosing to extend mercy all the stinking time? You follow me? Because the truth is, you're just mean to me. You know, if I'm willing to address that, you're just mean. And if we're looking at it on a continuum, okay, and this is how I would work with someone, I would draw a continuum. And on one end, I would put aggressive. And on the other end, I'd put passive. And in the middle, between two lines, I would put assertive. You follow me? Because our tendency is to live on one end of that spectrum or the other. You know, the ability to assert is my ability to recognize that there is a boundary around my life. Okay? So if someone is just continually being aggressive, I can basically go to that side, that boundary, and say, okay, this is where the line is. You're being aggressive, and I'm going to pull back. I'm not going to deal with that. Okay? When you want to talk to me in a manner that is respectful, then we can have this, discussion. But if you're just going to come at me with aggression, I'm going to pull back. I'm going to draw a line here, and we're not having this discussion anymore. You follow me? I don't have to be mean. I don't have to meet aggression with aggression. Mm-hmm. I can be assertive in such a way that says, no, you're not treating me the same way anymore. Mm-hmm. And if this continues, I am leaving. And I'm not saying that in a, pack my bags, I'm out the door, I think more of a dramatic style relationship, where we just throw that out there. But basically we're establishing a boundary, a line that says, okay, this is where I start, this is where you stop, and this is where I start. And I think that's helpful for codependency. But that individual has to learn how to basically assert, because they've spent so much time on the passive end of the scenario for them to even assert, which is middle, which is healthy from my perspective. Okay. They have to be, from their perspective, they have to be mean. Yes. That's mean spirited. Yes. That's mean. That's something they've never really developed, is the ability to recognize their own anger and say, okay, that's unacceptable. That's too far.
It's interesting because, in regards to codependency, I mean, that's a term I pulled, through Celebrate Recovery, and we talk a lot about that, and it's often the other end of the stick of an addict, right? Is the codependent, but one thing we've noticed, and it's not just us, I mean, it's a common understanding, is that as someone works through the issue of codependency, of learning how to move on that continuum towards assertiveness, they very often blow past the line. Sure. That's a very common beginning first stage, is to go, you know what? I'm done. And just wham! I'm now mean, and this is what you get of me. And the sense of freedom that they feel from that, like, you see it over and over, that pattern of going like, wow, this is great. I did it. I made it. And you're like, well, you're on your way. Yes. Because now, that's not the end goal either. Now I'm like him.
Now I'm the bully.
Right. Yeah. Like, and I think there's a freedom in an amazing part of getting to that side of like going, oh wow, I don't have to be that.
Exactly.
And that's important.
Yep.
But at the same time, I think that's part of the continuum of learning as a codependent, is to recognize you're probably going, you don't know what assertive looks like. If you did, you'd be better at it, right? So there's a chance maybe you'll put an anemic effort at it and still be codependent, and you're like, it doesn't work. Or you're going, no, I'm going to give it a real effort, and you just blow past the line, and now you're mean, but you now see the value in it. So I would encourage, like, you got to push, you got to do your best, but recognize that maybe the first attempts at learning how to be assertive will be mean.
Exactly.
You know, and you might feel like it's mean, but you also might get a sense of like, ooh, that feels good. I mean, I like being on this side of the equation, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
You can, and at the same time, I think, you know, we have that tendency, you know, when we experience something new, it's kind of like a drunk trying to ride a horse. You know, we do end up shifting from one side to the other, and it's very hard to shift to just the middle and ride straight ahead. Yeah. You know, not using an analogy of addiction, but still it is that dynamic that we might at times. And I think, you know, if we talk about passive aggressive relationship, that's exactly what that is. It's the drunk trying to ride the horse. You follow me? Versus that ability to learn how to assert for myself and establish healthy boundaries that is able to address conflict in a way that's healthy and say, this is what I saw. Help me understand. This is what I experienced. Because at that point, we are able to share our truth, what we experienced, what I saw, what I heard, in such a way that is extending mercy to you. Because there is a benefit of the doubt, if you will, that you weren't necessarily meaning to be menacing or diabolical. Right. You know, so often our tendency can be, well, you just meant to do that. You were trying. I know what you want, what you were doing. No, you don't know. You may think, and that's okay. But at the same time, that mercy is the part that allows you to say, oh, thanks for sharing that. That's not necessarily what I meant. I can understand, you know, what you heard. And I'm honestly sorry that you heard it that way. Because that's not what I intended. But that's not an excuse on my part. I'm willing to acknowledge that that's what was conveyed as far as you heard it. Yeah.
It's so valuable to be able to say that.
Yeah.
That sounds like a healthy individual.
Yes.
So let's get back to the unhealthy individual.
Did I divert from the question?
No. Okay. I'm saying you went right to the ideal, which is amazing. Like that's what the listener should be saying. I want. Okay. To get there, but let's go back to I'm not there. I'm the worst version of. So we're talking about codependence. I think. Yep. You could go on for years about that, but the other thing I would encourage is, because you don't know what assertiveness looks like, get people in your life who do, and let them hold you accountable. Yes. Like whether it's a counselor, you're in Mark's office, and you say, "Well, do you think that was assertive, or do you think that was just mean?" You know, like, or if CR, we call it accountability partner, sponsor, whatever, because. To think that you can figure it out on your own. Well, did you so far? No. All right. Well, let's get some help. All right. So we talked about...
And I think to as a step, you know, and I think about it from the terms of my office sometimes, you know, it is that point of where do I think I am on that continuum? Oh, yeah. You follow me? Put an X.
Step one is denial, right? Right. So figuring out,
I have to be able to recognize... where I am on this continuum. Am I so passive that I'm enmeshed in other people's problems or my problems, or, you know, that kind of thing? Or am I able to recognize what's your problem and what's my problem, you know, or are you just my problem? And that's on the aggressive end. That's that kind of thing. So be able to identify that.
How often when you ask that question, self-assessment questions, you know, I have a perception of what my answer would be to this, but how often are we in denial when we answer? Like, here's the continuum, you know, I have my two hands held up, left and right? Yep. And the right is the extreme of mean and you know, whatever. The left is the extreme of codependence and enmeshment, and your problems are my problems. How often do we say, no, I'm actually way over here, I'm way over, like we admit that, or do we often bring ourselves very close to the middle in our assessment? I'm curious.
I have found when we talk with people about their patterns and cycles and tendencies, and then I draw the continuum. It's very easy for them to see, oh,
Gotcha.
Wow, I'm all the way over by that arrow you just made under passive.
You know,
they're willing to put their X there.
So you give them the full context before asking for their assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
We talk about it in a sense of patterns and cycles. You know, it's like, okay, yeah, you know, he should know or she should know what I'm thinking. It's like, how would they know that? Help me understand that better. Well, you know, I did this. They should have known. No, I don't think that's fair. You know, help me understand that. Why? How could they know if you just did this? You know, is that conveying that full sense of what you need, or are they supposed to interpret that based on that snippet, that text you sent, that 5-word text? Are they supposed to, you know, elicit the feelings that you felt in that from a text message? You know, that's kind of, because then we can say, well, you know what, there was some stuff missing there. There was a lot of thought that wasn't in that I felt, but I can understand how it wasn't conveyed.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like How I See It, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.